Good morning, everyone. Let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us with your living spirit, that we may feel the joy of your presence, that we may live in this world with the same consciousness that you lived, freedom, generosity of heart, kindness, enthusiasm for the well-being of others. These are the gifts of your presence in our lives. Help us to open these gifts and share them again with all. Om, peace. Amen. Today is Monday, and Monday is what I call Money Monday, because Master put it, he said, every good, noble, or philanthropic enterprise sooner or later comes down to a matter of money. He was so remarkably practical in his idealism, which has been one of the secrets of Ananda's success, is that Swami took that lesson to heart and was also very practical in his idealism. And over the course, especially since the pandemic started, and I found myself confined to quarters for long periods of time and chained to California, as I still am, for a while. And suddenly the opportunities for exactly what I'm doing now, which is this kind of broadcasting, just really exploded, because I had the equipment already, I had the situation, and my efforts simply outstripped the ability of the Ananda Palo Alto staff to keep up with me, because they had a whole world of their own to take care of, which was Divine Mother's way of changing my orientation from just being a staff person. I'm still technically on the staff, but I work a little differently now, to asking all of you who are the recipients of the ministry that I'm doing to help make it happen. We decided to call it the Mission of the Masters, and you all have been supporting us wonderfully. And it's allowed me to just be able to think about what we might do. Mostly me personally, but not 100%. So now I have technical help that I need all the time. My wonderful friend Bhavani helps me with most of the technical, with a little bit from Keshava every now and then. And we've also been able to record some audiobooks, titles of Swamiji's, been able to fund the translation into Spanish and into Italian of Lightbearer. And in fact, tomorrow we're doing a book launch over Zoom of the Italian edition of Lightbearer. And I've just been able to think about what I am, who I am, and what I'm doing in an entirely different way, 100% because of the support that you've been giving. So you can go to Patreon, which is a wonderful website which links creative people with the resources to support them. If you would like to just sign up and contribute on a regular basis, go to my website, ashajoy.com. There's a way you can donate there through PayPal or other means. And all of it has just made this last year and more extraordinarily expansive, and I think we're doing good work for God. So let's keep it up. And I think I'm about 70 people short of breaking 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. So any of you who know anybody who's been thinking about it, I think it's pretty painless. You just click it, and then it'll just shift to 10. Then we'll be in double digits, okay? I don't count it by numbers. I stopped a long time ago counting. Even when, when I'm teaching in person, I don't count the people in the room, because let me phrase it the right way. Naturally, we'd like to share it with as many people as possible, but it's mostly just heart-to-heart connection, soul to soul. So as Master said, I prefer a soul to a crowd, but I like crowds of souls. That's how he put it, because it's enthusiasm. So it's going to shift me now. Let's sort of start our day, what we're going to do here today. This is being recorded in 2021. We're in the last few days just before Christmas. And Christmas in our community is always a great big event, and this year is no exception. We're managing, we're doing much more in person because it's easy for us to, this is a very nice area to live in. The pandemic is quiescent, not gone, but quieter here. So we've been able to do a lot in person. So I'm completely involved in Christmas, and it's much more interesting to me. So that's what we'll do for 4 days. So what I wanted to, oh yes, let me just sort of find the place where I was going to go. Give me a moment here. Oh yes, because we love to sing, and we've been held back from singing because of the pandemic. We've had people singing with masks on or singing quietly, and we do sing in our temple, but it's still, the masks are an inhibition. And we couldn't have choir because singing was one of the most, unsafe things to do. So our brilliant creative choir director discovered a parking garage, which is just like a quarter of a mile from the community where many of us live, one of those multi-story concrete parking garages, that always figure prominently in some thriller movie where the killer is hiding and everybody's running. Exactly that kind of parking garage. A little brighter, a little more cheerful, and without any scary music. So it's just like, there we are. And of course, the parking garage is like this concrete box, which is fantastic. Acoustics. In fact, Karen Gamow, who's the choir director, and her husband David, they're in the habit, whenever they're anywhere where they find good acoustics, they stop and sing a little duet just to enjoy the acoustics. So she and he have been very aware for a long time about the great acoustics of parking garages. So we had started having choir practice in the parking garage, and we were all vaccinated. Everybody who was there was vaccinated. And I don't even remember now whether we wore masks or not. I think mostly we didn't, because we were just right outside. By then it was okay. So we've been the Ananda Garage Band is what we've been, which is just like perfect. So we would just go over there a couple of times a month or once a week and just have our choir rehearsals. So every year it's been our custom to have a big Christmas caroling event. We just love Christmas carols. From my very first Christmas at Ananda in 1971, I did a class a couple of days ago. You can find it online. Christmas with Swamiji. It was a suggestion for our community's 12 days of Christmas. We have a different program every night. And if you haven't tuned into them, you can find them. They've been all very fun. So I was talking about my very first Christmas in 1971. I moved to Ananda Village, which was the only Ananda there was, on June 1st, so of that same year. So it was my first Christmas. And I was raised Jewish, so we never had Christmas. So it was my first Christmas, full stop. Ananda otherwise. And it was a nice way to begin. And Swamiji was still with us, and I won't retell the whole story, but on the Christmas Eve party, Swamiji, there was a woman lived in the community also. Her name was Kalyani. She was a trained classical pianist and a trained singer. Beautiful voice, beautiful soprano voice. And she and Swami shared their musical education and the ease with which they sang. And we had a harmonium then that had foot pedals, so she could play it like a small organ. And she played with the music in front of her and sang. Swami stood right behind her and sang. And all of Krishna's soldiers look like Krishna, which is saying that whatever the spirit of the leader is, everyone else follows. So Swamiji, being a musician and an artist and a writer, he attracts lots of singers and writers, and we all like him. So even in the early years, there were a lot of good musicians. And they sang Christmas carols. And I'd heard them here and there because I grew up in the U.S., which is especially at that time, less so now, but it was a Christian-dominated country. But I'd never heard Christmas carols. I'd never heard people who really loved God in the way that spoke to my heart, worshiping. And that's really what they were doing. I've never been much of a singer, and I was less of a singer then, but you can see, just even the very thought of it. Swamiji made a very interesting statement once after a satsang he gave in his dome. I say that because it was before when his whole living space was what is now the living room of what is now called Crystal Hermitage, which is where he lived when he lived at Ananda Village. We had a satsang in the living room there, and the community, it would have been 40 people at the most, maybe less. There were more people in the community, but they didn't all come. And it was winter, and winter made it even more cozy. At least my recollection is that it was winter, because we had snow and rain, and we were just this isolated, like almost like a spaceship, just in the middle of nowhere. And it was a very inspired evening. And afterwards, Swami, I believe he said both of these things on the same occasion. He said, when spiritual liberation comes, and suddenly, or not, I wish it were sudden, but when we are finally free of this long cycle of delusion, and we look back on all of our incarnations, and it's in the millions how many incarnations we had. Swami said you can look back on all those incarnations and you realize that it was all just a dream. It was just waves on the surface of the sea rising and falling. It was never what it seemed. But he said there will be moments of enduring reality. And those are the moments in which, for one reason or another, our consciousness rose above the vibration of delusion, and we touched into the living presence of eternal spirit, of Satchidananda, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. And he said those, you look back and you see everything else was just the string. It doesn't mean anything, but the jewels, the pearls of that moment are still there because it happened in our souls. Master, when he went to visit the home of his first disciple in America, who was Dr. Lewis, he was walking up the stairs inside the house, the internal staircase, and there was a landing about halfway up. There might have even been a window seat there, I'm not sure. Master stopped and he said, someone had an experience of God here. And Dr. Lewis said when he was about 6 or 7 years old, he had a vision, I think he had a vision of an angel. He had an experience of an angel right on that spot. And, 20 years later, Master's walking up the stair, and the vibration of that divine experience was such that Master could, what happened here? Something happened here. This was inside the family home. So it's not like there was any kind of a shrine, and Dr. Lewis was just a child, so he had no context for it. I don't know if he told anyone at the time or not, but it was just a child's experience, but Master felt it. Master said wherever a realized Master has lived, his vibrations are there forever, because it's eternal truth. So Swami was saying, anytime that we touched into eternity, that remains in eternity. When Swami was a child, he used to go to sleep. He always went to sleep this way. He would see a light at the spiritual eye, although he didn't know what it was. He would just see a light at the spiritual eye, and he would stare into that light until the light overcame him. And that was how he went to sleep. And he was much older before he realized that that isn't what everybody did when they went to sleep. I think he was probably about 9, because that's when he began to realize that the world he lived in was not the world that other people lived in. And he would just go into a superconscious state as a child. And then when he became 9, he became a little anxious about it and pulled back from altered states until he met Master when he was 22. Master taught him Kriya. And Swami said, when I went into superconsciousness again, it was the same moment and the same reality that I had gone into as a child. What I loved, though, it was the same moment, because there is no time in that realm. So when we come to liberation and we look back at all those moments when we touched into eternity, time disappears. And we're just where we've always been. I have to say these things with a question mark at the end, because I've contemplated that statement of Swamiji over and over and over again. Just like the only thing that's real is when we touch into eternity. And by the grace of God, I have a number of pearls on a string because of Swamiji, and things that have happened, not always in his physical presence, but because of his grace. So then Swami also said, either on that same occasion or close to it, he looked out at all of us who were, we had been, it was one of those moments. And he said to us from a great distance, he said, I loved it, you're going to get it right sooner or later. He said, why waste a few million years? And I've often asked myself, how many more years do I want to waste? I'm going to get it right sooner or later. I'm going to understand where true happiness comes from. How much more time do I want to waste? And I felt very powerfully, and that's why I think the two statements were at the same evening, that he was talking about where we had all just been together. He was telling us this is going to be one of the pearls on the string of our many incarnations. And I don't know if it was Christmas time. I don't have any feeling that it was, but every time Christmas comes around, ever since that very first Christmas, when we were in those carols, well, where I started at the garage, the Ananda Garage Band, we usually have Christmas carol. Has been our habit to have Christmas parties where we can do Christmas carols right in this very room from which I'm broadcasting. The fact that nobody comes in this house right now is what allows me to have this studio set up here all the time. But usually we've been here since 1989. This house is fully decorated for Christmas, and we have these parties, but it's shoulder to shoulder. So we weren't able to do it. But then Karen had the brilliant idea that we could have a caroling party in the garage. So she actually got permission from the owners, God bless them. They just said, sure. I mean, we've been singing there with permission this whole time. And I really bless them for being generous and courageous enough not to worry, just let us come in. And because there's not that much going on over there, the third and fourth floor are pretty empty. So last night, about 40 of us, I think, we just drove in, brought some chairs, brought our instruments, and for 2 hours, we just sang our little hearts out. And there were so many levels of it that was so deep. And it was joyful. It was very informal. It was not a choir performance. It was cold. We were all bundled up, but not too cold. And it wasn't a performance. It was a party. It wasn't even a party. It was a celebration. That's the right word. And we were the whole spirit. We were also hungry for it because we've been deprived of each other for quite a long time. But what was so moving to me was that people just gave their hearts to the music. And because all of Krishna's soldiers look like Krishna, whenever Ananda groups sing, we sing really well. Sometimes I'm in a restaurant and I'll hear some little family group try to sing happy birthday. Poor dears, you know, they just, it's not common. I've lived in Ananda so long, I'm just accustomed to being surrounded by good singers and also by singers who give their heart to it. So we stood there, and we have just ways of doing this because we've been a family for many years. We just have these pages, and it's alphabetical, and you just call out the next one, the one that you want, and whoever calls it out first gets to do it. And we went through almost the whole repertoire in two or more hours, and we choose the more spiritual of the Christmas carols, you know, not the ones that just celebrate snow and gifts and eggnog and stuff like that. We're much more interested in the baby Jesus. And Swamiji, by now, there's several, you know, half a dozen songs that Swamiji wrote that are also incorporated in that. And I thought, I wish the whole world could be like this. And I also realized very, very deeply, we do it for joy. When Swami was asked, and he may have been asked by me actually, what the purpose of Ananda was at a satsang he gave. What's the purpose of Ananda? He said to have fun. And we laughed. I mean, isn't that great? What's the purpose? To have fun? And we all laughed because it seemed like such a silly answer in a certain way. You know, we wanted we're here to do Master's work, the original teachings of Jesus, you know, I mean, we just expected something with a little more profundity. But actually, Swami was exactly right. And when we stopped laughing, he said, but you have to understand what we consider to be fun. What we consider to be fun is to be close to Divine Mother and then to share it, just to share with everyone. Because, as Swami himself said, it's the nature of joy to want to share itself. And that's how he answered the question, why did God make creation? Because God's nature is bliss, and it's the nature of bliss to want to share itself. And then in his wonderful way, Swamiji just brought it right down to something so practical that we really understood right away. He said, you see a good movie, you go to a good restaurant, you find a nice hike that you really like. What's the first thing you do, practically? You call somebody, or nowadays you email, or you text, or you send it to your whole list. I just went to the restaurant, here's a picture of my dinner, you know. And because it's the nature of joy to want to share itself. And we were there in this parking garage, and we were in a corner where there weren't that many cars, but a few people came by, and they would see us. And one couple stopped for a while, and we gave them a list of carols, and maybe for 3 or 4 songs, they stood and sang with us. And it was so interesting to me. I so wanted them to just come into the center of the circle and stay with us until the whole party was over. And it was interesting to just watch that feeling in me. I was very disappointed when they finally walked away. They seemed like very nice people, and she especially seemed to really enjoy the singing. But it was so much more that we were there to do. And the freedom to be able to, just without any embarrassment, without any self-consciousness. It's just like we have all this beautiful music. Let's just lose ourselves into the music. Sometimes we think that the spiritual path is more complicated than it is. It's really just self-forgetfulness, just losing track of this one. Master, at the end of his life, Swamiji talks about when they were out at the desert and Master was working on his Bhagavad Gita commentary. And after the day's work was done, sometimes Master would walk around the garden there, at the outside, and holding on to Swami's arm. And he had to hold on to Swami's arm because sometimes he had difficulty walking. He did take karma onto his knees of his disciples. He had trouble with his knees at the end of his life, but that wasn't why he stumbled. Swami said when he stumbled, Master would say, I'm in so many bodies, sometimes I forget which one I'm supposed to keep going. Anandamayi Ma used to say that. She would say, if those who are with me don't tell me that it's time to eat, I simply forget to eat. I can't remember whether I've eaten or not. Because the rigid awareness of my separate reality, which is always with us, the Master simply doesn't have that. He most of the time remembers which body he's supposed to keep going, but Master said the same. I have to ask people whether I've eaten or not. Because he was, especially this was the end of Master's life, he just didn't need to keep his awareness in that body anymore. He could let it be wherever it needed to be. That's where we're really going. It's not to get this one all organized to do its thing even better. It's to become completely unconcerned about it. And when all of us were there singing these songs that we know so well and love so much, just giving everything of our energy to it, all we are ever is a flow of energy. Even this individuality in this body that we hold so carefully, it's just a pattern of energy. And it's held together by our delusion that this is who I am and that it's a separate reality and I have to hold it together. Now, the Master keeps his body because it's God's will that he would keep his body, but he doesn't identify with it. He can identify just as easily with the infinite. He lives in eternity. He's not in this. This is just a temporary thing, you know? And this is what the Masters come to teach us, and they set up this, you know, this pattern for this universe, this pattern of the life of Christ, this pattern of his birthday, the birthday of Jesus, being so joyful, you know, and it's the joy of it is because we've been rescued. We've been rescued. In the Festival of Light, it says we have this. We reach the point in our lives where we cry out, you know, what is reality? For what reason was I made? And then in the Festival of Light, which is the Sunday ritual we do, it says, ever and again, through your awakened sons, the answer comes. And so the answer comes. Just any of you who can remember, you know, when we didn't know about this path, or when we weren't clearly focused on it, and what that felt like. I've had the great privilege in my life of being on the front line, so to speak, and often in a position where I'm communicating to people who are just learning about the path, you know, what I learned from Swami. So I'm constantly reminded of the before and after. You know, the before, like when I knew there had to be a meaningful way to live, but I didn't know what it was. And then in my case, I met Swamiji. And I'd begun to understand self-realization. But when I met Swamiji, the ideals became practical. Prior to that, I was learning the ideals, but I didn't know how to make them practical. I saw Swami making it practical. And this is what these masters come to bring. Ever and again, through your awakened sons, the answer comes. We're celebrating their life, but what we're really celebrating is our own. We're celebrating the life that God's awakened children have brought to us. And what joy, what joy, what joy. God bless you.